I never expected the end of a 32-year marriage to arrive on a Thursday morning inside a cold lawyer's office with the air conditioner humming above my head. I'd barely sat down, still smoothing my skirt, when my husband of more than 3 decades, shifted in his chair beside me with a stiffness that told me something was wrong. His cologne, once comforting, felt sharp today, almost like a warning. The room smelled of polished wood and freshly printed paper. A single beam of sunlight slipped through the blinds and landed across the table, right where the stack of documents sat. I didn't know then that those papers would change everything. Welcome to my channel, I'm Mama Jo. And before I tell you what happened next, comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my stories travel. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to quiet the trembling in them. My wedding band, thin gold, worn smooth with time, pressed against my skin. A reminder of promises made when we were young, hopeful and foolish enough to believe that love alone could stitch 2 people together forever. He cleared his throat. A small sound, barely noticeable, but it sliced straight through my thoughts. I turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at me, not even pretending. Instead, he wore a strange expression, tight around the mouth, eyebrows lifted just slightly. Not anger, not sadness. Something worse. Anticipation. The lawyer, a patient-looking young woman with neat braids and glasses perched low on her nose, sat across from us flipping through a manila file. She offered me a polite smile, but even she seemed tense, almost sympathetic. "Mrs. Thompson," she began gently, "thank you for coming on such short notice. Your husband said this was urgent." Urgent. No one had told me anything was urgent. Before I could ask, before I could even turn fully in my seat, his fingers drummed the table. 3 short, impatient taps. Then, with a small exhale, he slid a stack of papers across the polished wooden surface. The motion was so smooth, so practiced, it made my stomach drop. The folder landed in front of me with a soft thud. My heart stuttered. I stared at it, not touching it, letting the silence stretch thin between us. A faint scent of printer ink rose from the pages. A corner of one sheet peeked out, crisp and glaringly white. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Go on," he said. "Open it." His voice, once warm enough to calm my storms, felt cold and unfamiliar. It echoed softly off the wooden walls, too sharp for the quiet room. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. What is this?" I whispered. He finally looked at me then. Really looked at me, and the expression in his eyes made my breath catch. Not love, not regret, not even exhaustion. Amusement. "It's a divorce, sweetheart," he said, almost laughing. "You know, what people your age usually end up facing sooner or later, especially when they stop being useful." I felt the air leave my lungs all at once, like someone had punched through my ribs. For a moment, the room blurred around the edges. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. He nodded toward the papers again, his smirk widening. "Go on, take a look. You'll be leaving with, well, not much, but you won't need much at your age, will you?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Heat pricked the back of my eyes. I tried to blink it away, but one tear slipped free, trailing warm down my cheek. I brushed it quickly with my thumb, unwilling to let it fall where he could see. He chuckled, an actual laugh this time, low and mocking. "Oh, come on now. Don't start crying. You knew this was coming." He waved a dismissive hand. "You're practically retired from life, so you don't get to take the house, the savings, or anything I've built. Let's be realistic here." Useless. Old. A burden. He had said versions of these things before, quietly, under his breath, when he thought I wasn't listening, but hearing him say them now, boldly, confidently in a room designed for truth and decisions, felt like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted something fragile. I took a shaky breath. My fingers moved on their own, reaching for the folder. The paper was cool, stiff, unfriendly. I opened it slowly, bracing myself for the words that might shatter me completely. The first page was nothing but legal jargon. Cold, impersonal, sharp. My name typed neatly at the top, followed by his, the letters looking like strangers on the same line. I kept turning the pages, each one hitting harder than the last. My hands trembled. He watched me, smiling. "You can't manage a house alone, and you definitely can't manage finances. It's better this way. You'll get a little something. Maybe enough for groceries. Groceries, groceries. 32 years together. And that was what he thought of me. The lawyer cleared her throat softly. Mr. Thompson, perhaps— No, he interrupted. She needs to hear the truth. I won't sugarcoat it. She's been living in a fantasy for too long. My fingers tightened on the edge of the document, my knuckles pale against the warm brown of my hands. I forced myself to keep breathing, slow and steady. I refused to crumble. Not here, not in front of him. The light from the window shifted, catching a sliver of a tab sticking out near the back of the stack, a small, faded tab, yellowed from age, barely peeking out. I frowned. Strange. It didn't match the crisp divorce papers. Something about that tab, its color, its placement, stirred a soft, distant memory. My heart skipped. I reached toward it, fingertips brushing the worn paper edge. It felt different. Older, thicker, familiar in a way I couldn't quite name yet. I pulled the file slightly, revealing more of the tab, the handwriting on it. It couldn't be. Could it? As my eyes focused, a rush of recognition washed over me so abruptly that my breath faltered mid-inhale. I hadn't seen that handwriting in decades. And suddenly, everything inside me shifted. I sat up straighter, wiped the tears from my cheeks, pressed my trembling hand flat against the document. He kept smiling. He thought he had already won. But as my fingers slowly slid toward that faded tab, that tiny, familiar mark tucked inside the file, a different kind of tremor began in my chest. Not fear, memory, power. Something he had forgotten. Something I didn't even realize was still here. Something old, something legally binding. Something he would regret leaving inside this folder. My pulse thudded in my ears as I gently, carefully lifted the tabbed page from beneath the stack. My voice barely rose above a whisper. What is this doing here? He didn't hear the shift in my tone. He only leaned back further in his chair, smirking lazily. But I heard it. For the first time that morning. My voice didn't sound broken. It sounded awake, alive, and as my eyes landed on the words partially hidden beneath the paper, words I never expected to see again, a single thought bloomed inside me, quiet but undeniable. He has forgotten something important, something that belongs to me, something that could change everything. And for the first time since he slid those divorce papers across the table, I felt the smallest spark of strength return to my hands. Something familiar was waiting in that file, something he didn't want me to find, something he shouldn't have left behind. I lifted the page slowly, and the world around me shifted on its axis. When I think back on the beginning, the real beginning, I see sunlight. It pours through the cracked windows of our first apartment, warm and golden, falling across mismatched furniture and dreams too big for the space they lived in. I was 22 then, barefoot on a peeling linoleum floor, laughing as I stirred a pot of beans that were always slightly burnt because I never learned to keep the flame low. He would come up behind me, arms slipping around my waist, chin settling on my shoulder as if it belonged there. One day, he'd whisper, we'll have a kitchen twice this size, maybe 3 times. His voice was full of hope back then. Ambition, not greed. Dreams, not demands. We had nothing, truly nothing. A futon that sagged in the middle. A tiny table with 2 chairs we rescued from a curb. A bathroom fan that rattled like it would fall from the ceiling every night at 9 p.m. But we were in love. Fierce, foolish, determined love. The kind that makes people believe they can bend the world to their will. He used to bring home flowers he bought from a street vendor for $1. I used to tuck handwritten notes into his lunch bag, reminding him to eat. He would kiss my forehead before leaving for his shift. I would wait up for him, even when I was exhausted. We were a team. I remember sitting on the floor with him one stormy night, candles flickering because the power had gone out. Rain hammered the roof so loudly we had to raise our voices to be heard. Baby, he said, tracing my hand with his finger. We'll build something real. We'll climb out of this together. I believed him. I believed every word. But love is strange. It can survive storms, poverty, and hardship, but it often falls apart under comfort, under plenty, under the very success you once prayed for. As he climbed in his career, something in him began to shift. At first it was subtle, tiny cracks that I mistook for stress, Long work hours, missed dinners, a new sharpness in his tone when he came home tired. Then it grew. The man who once hugged me from behind now brushed past me without eye contact. The man who promised we'd build a life together began building one alone, one that seemed too big to include me. He bought nicer clothes, expensive cologne, new ties. His confidence grew, but so did his impatience. "You don't understand business," he'd snap. "You worry too much," he'd groan. "You're being dramatic," he'd laugh. Slowly, he became someone else. He'd come home late, then later, then not at all. Nights turned into battlegrounds inside my chest, me lying awake, staring at the bedroom ceiling, listening for the sound of his key in the lock. Some nights it came, some nights it didn't. When I asked questions, he'd dismiss them with a wave of his hand. "Don't start, please. You're too emotional. I'm tired. Can we not do this?" And the words I clung to during our early years, "we're a team," slowly faded into silence. My mother saw the change long before I admitted it to myself. She was a quiet woman, but wise, in ways that made life feel less terrifying. She had lived through enough storms to recognize one forming on the horizon. I remember sitting at her kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, nervously twisting my hands together as she poured me tea. "He's ambitious," she said gently, "and ambition is not a bad thing, but ambition without gratitude becomes a threat." I looked up at her, startled. "Mom, he loves me." Her eyes softened, but not with certainty, more with hope. "I know he does," she said, "but love doesn't always last. People change, circumstances change, hearts change." She reached for my hand, rubbing it gently between her palms. "I want you protected in case he changes in a way that harms you." Those words felt like betrayal when she said them. Protected from him? Impossible. He was my husband, my partner, my beginning. But my mother insisted I sign a prenuptial agreement, quietly, privately, before she transferred some inheritance property into my name. "Just in case," she whispered. "You never know who someone becomes when life gets bigger." I didn't want to sign it. I argued. We even had our first real mother-daughter fight that day, but she stood firm. "This isn't because I don't trust him," she said softly. "It's because I love you, and I trust life even less." So I signed it, reluctantly, with tears in my eyes, feeling almost disloyal as I held the pen. The papers felt heavy in my hands, like a promise I hoped I'd never have to use. I tucked the file away in a drawer and tried to forget it existed. I wish I'd listened to her sooner. I wish I'd understood the quiet sadness in her eyes when she said, "just in case," because over the years, the warm man who once held me close became cold, a stranger in my home, a ghost in his own promises. He stopped calling me baby, stopped asking how my day was, stopped seeing me entirely. I remember the first time he ignored my birthday, the first time he came home smelling like someone else's perfume, the first time he rolled his eyes when I cried. Little deaths, one by one. Our marriage didn't break suddenly. It eroded, grain by grain, like sand slipping through fingers too tired to catch it. I held on as long as I could, to the memories, to the vows, to the hope that the man I married still lived somewhere beneath the bitterness. But hope is a dangerous thing. It keeps you longer than you should stay. It blinds you to the truth that love, once rotted, rarely resurrects. The day my mother died, he didn't come to the funeral. "Business trip," he said. "Important meeting." And a part of me broke that day, a part that never healed. Now, sitting under the dim lights of the lawyer's office, the weight of 32 years pressed against my chest, threatening to crush me from the inside. My mother tried to prepare me for this moment. I just didn't know it would feel like drowning. I looked down at the divorce papers again, tears blurring the text. The lawyer's voice echoed faintly, muffled beneath the rush of blood in my ears. And then, that yellowed tab, that memory of a file I signed decades ago, my mother's trembling hand over mine, her voice saying, "just in case he changes." My heart pounded as I brushed the edge of the tab with my fingertip. It was familiar, too familiar. The texture of the paper, the handwriting, the faint coffee stain on the corner. My breath hitched. My mother's prenup. I knew it before I fully saw it, a document I had forgotten, one he certainly never remembered. I lifted my eyes slowly, turning from the faded tab back to the man who once promised to love me until his last breath, now smirking, confident, certain he had already won. He didn't remember, but I did. Now I did. And as that realization settled inside me like warm embers, something shifted. The humiliation didn't vanish, but it stopped consuming me. The heartbreak didn't disappear, but it no longer pushed me under. Something else rose instead. Something steady, something familiar, something that belonged to me long before he decided to throw me away. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and stared at the divorce papers with new eyes. His voice droned on beside me, bragging to the lawyer about his fair distribution. But I wasn't listening anymore, because buried inside that worn tab was the beginning of his downfall and the beginning of my return to myself. I stared at that faded tab for a moment longer, feeling its weight settle deeper into my chest. But before I could draw it fully out of the stack, before I could even take a steady breath, his voice sliced through the air again, sharp, impatient, and dripping with the same superiority that had slowly infected the last years of our marriage. "Well," he said, tapping the table with 2 fingers, "sign it." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes flicking between us. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but he lifted a hand sharply, silencing her before she could form a word. He turned that hand toward me then, palm open as if I were a clerk handing over a receipt. "Pen, signature, today." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "Today? You expect me to sign something like this? Today?" "Yes," he snapped. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. He said it as if I were the one making things difficult, as if I hadn't just had 32 years of my life shoved across a table like junk mail. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing with the kind of coldness that used to make me lose sleep. "That prenup won't protect you," he said smoothly, almost smugly. "Even if it existed, which I doubt it does, the law has changed. So let's stop pretending there's something you're hiding." I blinked, once, twice. He said it with such confidence, such practiced certainty, that for a moment doubt curled its fingers around my throat. Could it really be invalid? Could I be misremembering everything my mother insisted on? Could all that protection she hoped to give me, her final gift, really mean nothing now? He saw the hesitation in my eyes and seized it like prey. "There it is," he murmured. "That's your problem. You live in the past. You're delusional, clinging to old memories and old promises. But life moves on, sweetheart. People move on." His smirk deepened, cruel around the edges. "You should too, preferably far away from my assets." My breath caught. He didn't even bother to hide the contempt. "A burden," he added casually, as if the word meant nothing. "That's what you've become. I've carried you long enough." The word struck with such force that for a moment my vision thinned at the edges. My ears rang. A burden, delusional, useless, old. I felt them all press against me, heavy and suffocating. Slowly I set the folder down, careful not to let him see the tremor in my hand. "I'm not signing today," I whispered. He laughed, a dismissive, mocking sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet office. "You will," he said confidently, "because you don't have a choice." My throat tightened. "I do." "Do you?" he challenged, leaning back in his chair with a lazy smile. "Because I already moved out." The words hit harder than the divorce papers. Moved out, past tense. My stomach tightened. "With who?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. My voice cracked at the end. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even bother to soften the blow. "With someone who knows how to take care of herself," he said. "Someone younger. Someone who doesn't cling to me like I'm the only good thing that ever happened in her life." My heart clenched painfully. He knew exactly what he was doing, using my deepest insecurities like weapons. "She and I," he continued, smoothing invisible wrinkles off his suit sleeve, "have plans, real plans, and I need the house. She likes space. She can't live in that cramped little apartment she's in now. The house, my home, the place I raised our son, the place my mother prayed in every morning, the place where every memory, good and bad, lived inside the walls. You'll get the car you drive," he added, waving a hand dismissively. "Or maybe not. We'll see what the court says about your ability to maintain it." My breath came shallow. "You can't?" "Oh, but I can," he interrupted. "The account's mine." He shrugged. "The house? Mine." Another shrug. "Your car? Most likely mine." He leaned closer, whispering with a smirk, "You're not in a position to fight me." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Every word he threw landed like a stone inside my chest. I kept my eyes down, blinking rapidly so he wouldn't see tears gather again. My arms felt heavy, my body hollow. I felt like a glass about to shatter from the weight of everything pressing against me. But even through the noise, even through the humiliation, a quiet truth pulsed beneath it all. The prenup. My mother's prenup. He didn't remember it, but it remembered him. The meeting dragged on as he spoke confidently about dates and signatures and moving forward. As if breaking my entire life into pieces was nothing more than an administrative task, I nodded when necessary, stayed silent when the lawyer offered cautious glances toward me, kept my trembling hands folded neatly in my lap. Not because I agreed, not because I was beaten, but because silence sometimes protects you better than any outburst could. When the meeting finally ended, I gathered my purse with slow, careful movements. My legs felt weak, as though they had forgotten how to hold me. He walked out without waiting for me. Of course he did. The house felt different when I stepped inside, colder, emptier, as if it sensed the shift in my world. I stood in the living room for a long moment, staring at the framed photographs on the mantel. Wedding day, our son's first birthday, vacations, anniversaries, 32 years of a story I thought was ours, a story that now felt like it belonged to a stranger. I sank onto the couch, my purse still on my shoulder. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now, the facade I'd kept in the lawyer's office cracking under the weight of reality. My phone buzzed. I almost didn't look, almost, but something in me, some small masochistic curiosity forced my hand. A message from him, not even an hour after humiliating me. I opened it with numb fingers. Told the guys I'm finally getting rid of dead weight. Dead weight, that was me. Dead weight. Another ping, screenshots this time. Messages between him and someone saved in his phone as Baby, the younger woman. She'll sign. She has no fight in her. We'll get everything. Don't worry, she's too emotional to think straight. By next week, the house is ours. My stomach twisted. A sob escaped before I could stop it. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth as tears spilled hot and relentless down my face. Tears I had held back for hours. My body curled inward, shaking, breath broken into jagged pieces. How could someone I loved this deeply hate me this easily? I cried until the room blurred, until my hands went numb, until my throat ached from swallowing every scream I refused to let out. Eventually, when the tears ran dry, I reached for my purse. Slowly, uncertainly. Inside, beneath my wallet and keys, lay the marriage file I hadn't touched in years. My hand hovered over it, hesitating. Part of me was afraid. Afraid to hope, afraid to be wrong. Afraid that the tiny fragment of strength I felt earlier would collapse under reality. But the other part of me, the part shaped by my mother's voice, her warnings, her love, knew I had to look. My fingers finally closed around the worn edges of the file. I pulled it into my lap, staring at the faded label. My breath trembled. My thumb brushed the corner. And slowly, carefully, with a heart split between fear and fragile courage, I opened it. The file felt heavier than it should have, like the paper inside had absorbed every tear, every disappointment, every warning I once ignored. My fingers trembled as I eased it open, smoothing the worn edges the way one touches an old wound, gently, carefully, afraid of what might resurface. Inside, the first few pages were exactly what I expected. Old utility bills, a faded marriage certificate, photographs from the early years, him with fuller cheeks and softer eyes, me with a smile so wide it nearly spilled off the frame. Moments captured before ambition twisted him into someone unrecognizable. But beneath those familiar relics, beneath the ordinary scraps of a former life, there it was. A document so crisp, so strangely out of place among the faded papers that it stole the breath right from my lungs. The prenup, not a copy, not a draft. The original. The edges were yellowed slightly from age, but the ink, my signature, his signature, my mother's witness signature, the notary seal, was undeniable, permanent. Alive on the page in a way nothing else in my crumbling life felt alive. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. The lawyer's office felt miles away now. My husband's insults felt muted, far off, like echoes in a dream. All I could see was that paper, the promise my mother forced me to make, the one I believed I'd never need. My mother's handwriting in the margin caught my eye, a small note she left for herself during the signing. Protect her future, protect her heart. My vision blurred as tears welled again. But these tears felt different. Not born of pain, born of recognition, memory, strength. I smoothed my hand over the prenup, tracing the bold header at the top. Prenuptial agreement, legally binding contract. I inhaled sharply and began reading, line by line, clause by clause. With every word, the pressure in my chest loosened, slowly, steadily, like knots untangling after years of being pulled tight. Clause 1. All premarital assets belonging to the wife remain solely hers, without exception. My hand flew to my mouth. My mother's small house, the farmland she left me, the necklace passed down from her grandmother, mine, not his, never his. My heart beat faster. I kept reading, breath shallow, palms sweating. Clause 2. All inherited properties or financial gifts received by the wife at any point during the marriage shall remain solely in her possession. The second blow hit me. The lake house, the bonds, the land deed she secured with her final savings, also mine, and then the clause that made my skin prickle. Clause 3. Any property or investment purchased in the mother's name or through her estate, regardless of marital contribution, shall revert solely to the wife upon dissolution of marriage. I froze. I blinked. Reread it again. I felt the air shift around me, like the walls themselves were leaning closer. Everything he was trying to take, the house he bragged about, the savings he mocked me over, the investments he once told me didn't concern me. The land he claimed he could sell once the divorce was finalized. Every single thing, everything, was legally protected, legally mine. He had walked into that lawyer's office so sure, so smug, so ready to rip the ground out from under me. He had no idea the ground he stood on wasn't his at all. My breath shook as I exhaled, a sound almost like a laugh and a sob tangled together. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling my heart thudding. Not from fear anymore, but from awakening. My mother had saved me long before I knew I needed saving. For years, that prenup had been nothing but a forgotten stack of paper buried under old receipts and memories. But now, in my darkest moment, it rose like a shield, strong, undeniable, unyielding. I felt something inside me shift, a quiet power, a slow, rising certainty, a warmth spreading through a heart that had been shivering for too long. He thought I was helpless. He thought I was weak. He thought he had stripped me of every weapon, but I wasn't weaponless. I had the truth. I had the law. I had my mother's foresight. And now, I had the prenup. I leaned back on the couch, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the emotion wash over me. Sadness, gratitude, anger, relief, all mixing into something deep and complicated. When I opened my eyes again, the room felt different. Not lighter, not brighter, just steadier. My hand drifted back to the file, turning the prenup page carefully as if afraid it might crumble beneath my fingers. But it didn't. It held firm. It always had. And then, as I reached the bottom of the stack, something else caught my attention. A second document, tucked beneath the prenup, folded once, unlabeled, thicker than a normal sheet, and in handwriting I didn't recognize. Certainly not mine. My brows furrowed. I frowned deeper. I didn't remember signing anything else that day. I didn't remember my mother mentioning another document. I didn't remember a second envelope or another visit to the notary. And yet, there it was. Soft parchment. Edges slightly curled. My name on the corner in ink too new to belong to the prenup era. A familiar legal seal embossed at the top, faint but unmistakable. My heartbeat grew louder. Faster. I reached for it with a shaky hand. My fingers brushed the fold. Something inside me whispered, "This changes everything." I swallowed hard, throat tight, lungs refusing to expand. Slowly, I unfolded the page. And just as the first line of text came into view, something inside me froze solid. A gasp caught in my throat, because whatever this was, I absolutely did not remember it. But the moment my eyes scanned the signature line, I knew this wasn't just another paper. This was a secret waiting years to be found, and its truth might be even more powerful than the prenup itself. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, though fear sat quietly in the room with me, but because my mind felt strangely awake, sharper than it had in years. The discovery of the prenup had shaken something loose inside me. Not anger, not triumph, something quieter, something steadier, strength. Not the loud, roaring kind, the kind that sits in your chest like a warm stone, the kind you don't need to show for it to exist. By sunrise, I had the prenup laid out carefully on the dining table beside the second document, the one whose meaning I hadn't fully unraveled yet. I brewed tea but never drank it. I moved through the house with a calmness even I didn't fully understand. The trembling that had lived in my hands since the divorce meeting was gone. At 9 sharp, I dialed the number I found on an old business card tucked inside the envelope. A lawyer my mother once trusted. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and steady. When I told her my name, she paused. "Your mother's daughter," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. There was another pause. Then, "Come in today. Bring everything." By noon, I sat across from her in a high-ceilinged office, smelling faintly of leather and peppermint. She was older than I expected. Silver hair in soft curls, glasses perched low on her nose, eyes wise in that way people only get after decades of watching the world disappoint and surprise them in equal measure. "I remember your mother well," she said gently as she spread the documents across her desk. "She was meticulous, protective, much smarter than people gave her credit for." My heart squeezed. Yes, she was. She read the prenup once silently, then again slower, annotating with a gold fountain pen. Her expression didn't change, professional, focused, calm, but every few seconds she made a soft humming sound under her breath. When she finally set the pen down, she looked at me with an expression that made the back of my eyes sting. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "your husband is in for a very rude awakening." A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped me in a shaky rush. "It's valid?" I whispered. "After all these years?" "More than valid," she replied. "This is airtight, ironclad. Your mother protected every corner, every angle. He cannot touch your inherited property, your mother's assets, or any investment tied to her estate." Tears filled my eyes again, not from sadness, but something closer to gratitude, relief, vindication. She tapped the second document, the one I didn't remember signing. "And this," she added, "is very interesting." My pulse quickened. "What does it mean?" she smiled. The kind of smile that appears on a person who's uncovered a secret designed perfectly for its time. "It's an addendum. Your mother added it quietly, probably the same day you signed the prenup. It states that if your husband ever files for divorce due to infidelity or abandonment," she flipped the page elegantly, "all joint assets default to you as well." My breath caught. "All of them?" "Every last one," she said. "Bank accounts, vehicles, stocks, the house, even the retirement plan he's so proud of." My hand flew to my mouth. I felt dizzy. "He left you for another woman," she continued gently. "Publicly, boldly. He bragged about it in those messages. He has essentially handed you everything on a legal silver platter." I covered my eyes with trembling fingers. My shoulders shook, not with sorrow. With the overwhelming realization that everything he tried to steal, he had no right to in the first place. And now, because of his arrogance, his cruelty, his betrayal, he had given me even more. The lawyer rested a hand softly on mine. "We'll prepare quietly," she said. "No warnings, no confrontations. Let him think he has already won." A slow, deliberate nod left me. "People like him," she continued, "fall apart when they realize the person they underestimated the most is the one holding all the cards." Her words sank into me like warm water spreading through frozen veins. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, steady, certain. She began organizing folders, her movements practiced and precise. "I'll need copies of property titles," she said, "any investment records tied to your mother's estate, and receipts for major purchases in your name." "I have all of those," I whispered. Her eyebrows lifted. "Already?" A small smile tugged at my lips. "Yes, my mother always told me to keep records. I never knew why." "I do," she murmured. We spent hours assembling everything, neat stacks, labeled tabs, chronological order. Every page felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a fortress I didn't know I'd need, but one my mother built for me long before today. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. My husband's name lit the screen. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead," I opened the message. "Hope you're packing. I'll be coming by tomorrow to get the house keys." Another message followed instantly. "Don't embarrass yourself trying to fight this." And another. "The girl I'm with wants to redecorate. The sooner you're gone, the better." My lawyer exhaled sharply through her nose. "He's handing us evidence of emotional cruelty on a platter." I didn't reply to him. I didn't respond at all. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. "He's expecting you to crumble," she said softly. "I know." I slipped my phone back into my purse. "And I will. On the outside." She smiled faintly. "Good. Let him feel strong. Let him feel certain. It will make the final moment much more effective." By evening, the case file was complete. Every asset he wanted, protected. Every claim he made, invalid. Every insult he threw at me, soon to collapse under the weight of truth. She slid a final document toward me. "The court date is set," she said quietly. 2 weeks. My heart thudded in my chest. 2 weeks! 2 weeks until everything changes. 2 weeks until the truth stands taller than every lie he built. 2 weeks until he realizes the woman he mocked, belittled, underestimated, is the woman he cannot defeat. The lawyer stood and squeezed my hand gently. "You did good today. Now, rest. The next part will require courage, but you already have more than enough." I nodded, blinking back tears. When I got home, the evening sun spilled golden across my living room, casting warm light across the prenup I laid carefully on the table. I sat beside it, fingertips brushing the edge, heart full of a strange combination of grief and gratitude. My husband had forgotten this paper, forgotten its meaning, forgotten the power my mother placed in my hands decades ago, but I hadn't. Not anymore. I picked up the prenup gently, holding it close, my voice a soft whisper that trembled but did not break. "You shouldn't have forgotten this." The morning of the hearing felt unreal, too bright, too calm for a day that would decide the fate of 32 years of my life. Sunlight spilled through my curtains in thin golden lines, warming the carpet beneath my feet. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing slowly, letting the warmth settle into my bones. I wasn't trembling today. Not anymore. The prenup sat neatly in my bag, along with every document my lawyer and I had prepared. I touched the zipper once, making sure it was secure, then inhaled deeply. "Let's finish this," I whispered to myself. The courthouse parking lot buzzed with activity, people walking briskly, clutching folders, phones pressed to their ears, emotions tucked into tight expressions. My lawyer walked beside me, steady and composed. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool, the walls tall, lined with dark wood that made everything feel heavier, more serious. I took my seat at our table, my hands folded in my lap, my eyes lowered just slightly. I heard them before I saw them. Laughter. Light, careless laughter. My husband strolled into the courtroom wearing a navy blue suit, far too bold for a man who claimed he was nearly bankrupt from supporting me. Standing beside him was the young woman, the one he left me for. She wore a fitted dress, stilettos, and confidence so sharp it felt almost performative. Her perfume hit me a second later. Sweet. Too sweet. They looked like a couple arriving for brunch, not a divorce hearing. She held onto his arm, whispering something that made him smirk. His chest puffed out as though he owned the room, owned me, owned everything in it. I stared straight ahead. "Remember," my lawyer murmured, "silence is your power today?" I nodded once. My husband finally noticed me and leaned toward the young woman, whispering something behind the back of his hand. She giggled, then looked at me with raised brows, smug, taunting, as if the outcome were already written, as if the judge were nothing more than a formality, as if I were an old vase gathering dust, something expendable, replaceable, useless. My breath stayed steady. My heartbeat stayed quiet. The judge entered moments later, a tall woman with an unreadable expression and the kind of presence that silenced the entire room instantly. The bailiff called the session to order and everyone stood. "Be seated." My husband leaned back. Relaxed, legs stretched under the table as though he were attending a casual meeting. His lawyer wasted no time. "Your Honor, Mr. Thompson is prepared to finalize the divorce. As you can see, there are financial concerns. He has been the sole provider for years." "Sole provider?" The words escaped me in a whisper I didn't intend to speak aloud. The young woman smirked, leaning forward just enough for her voice to carry. "You didn't exactly bring much to the table, sweetheart. Let's be real." Her tone dripped with pity, the fake kind that hides cruelty underneath like a blade tucked inside velvet. My husband didn't correct her. He let her speak for him. He always did. His lawyer continued, flipping through papers dramatically. Given Mr. Thompson's financial contributions, he requests ownership of the primary home, the joint bank accounts, and the vehicle currently in Mrs. Thompson's possession. These all fall under equitable distribution based on his earnings. More like my generosity, my husband muttered loud enough for the judge to hear. She wouldn't survive 2 months on her own. She married up. Everyone knows that. My lawyer tensed but didn't speak. The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Mr. Thompson, you will speak only when addressed. He nodded but continued smirking, arrogance stitched into every line of his face. His lawyer pressed on. We also request that Mrs. Thompson vacate the marital home within 30 days due to her lack of financial contribution. Lack, my husband snorted. Please, she hasn't carried her weight in years. The young woman folded her arms, leaning back smugly. Honestly, she said under her breath, this should be quick. She doesn't have anything. My fingers curled around the edge of my chair, but I kept my expression still. Quiet, controlled. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. The judge finally turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, she said, voice steady, do you have anything you'd like to present today? I lifted my eyes slowly, meeting hers. Yes, Your Honor, I said softly. I do. My voice didn't shake, not this time. I reached calmly into my bag and withdrew the neat file, my mother's file, the one that smelled faintly of old paper and protection. I placed it gently on the table, sliding it forward. My mother insisted I sign this before our marriage, I said quietly. I didn't think I'd ever need it, but here it is. My husband's smirk faltered. Just a flicker. His lawyer frowned, hands tightening on her pen. The judge accepted the file and flipped it open, eyes scanning the first page. Her expression shifted subtly. Interest, focus, understanding. She turned the second page, then the third. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. My husband shifted in his seat. What is that? He demanded. The judge held up a hand to silence him before answering. It appears, she said slowly, to be the original prenuptial agreement signed by both parties before marriage. The young woman's smirk vanished instantly. My husband sat up straight. That was years ago. Irrelevant, probably invalid. The judge's tone sharpened. This document is notarized, binding, in excellent condition, and still entirely enforceable. My husband swallowed hard. His lawyer whispered urgently, Did you know she had this? I thought, he stammered. No, she doesn't. It shouldn't. But the judge was already reading aloud. Clause 1. All premarital assets belonging to the wife remain solely hers. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Clause 2. All inherited properties or financial gifts received by the wife during the marriage shall remain solely in her possession. The young woman's face twisted. What? What is that even? But the judge kept reading. Clause 3. Any property or investment purchased under the mother's estate shall revert solely to the wife upon dissolution of marriage. My husband's face drained of color. Then came the final blow, and this addendum. The judge paused, eyes narrowing. Signed and sealed by the mother of the bride, states that in cases involving infidelity or abandonment, all joint assets shall be awarded to the wife. Silence. Complete breath-stealing silence. My husband's mouth fell open. His eyes darted to me, accusing, desperate, furious. You tricked me. I met his gaze calmly. I didn't remember it until yesterday. The young woman stood abruptly, hands gripping the table. You said she had nothing. You promised. He grabbed her arm, hissing, Not now. No, she snapped, jerking away. You told me we'd get the house, the money, everything. The judge banged her gavel once. Order. Chaos simmered in their corner. Whispers, desperation, shock-twisting faces that had been so smug moments earlier. Meanwhile, I sat still, hands folded, breathing soft, heart steady. The judge cleared her throat. Given this legally binding document, she announced firmly, Mrs. Thompson will retain ownership of all premarital and inherited assets. My husband's lawyer sank into her chair. The judge continued. She will also retain ownership of the marital home. I closed my eyes briefly, relief washing through me. She will retain joint bank accounts. The young woman gasped sharply. She will retain the vehicle. My husband swore under his breath. And, the judge added, voice firm, Mr. Thompson will be responsible for all legal fees due to his misconduct. It was over, just like that. The judge rose. Court dismissed. My husband turned to me then, anger, disbelief, humiliation swirling across his face. You think you've won? He spat quietly. You think this makes you better than me? I stood slowly, smoothing my blazer. No, I said softly. It doesn't make me better. I held up the prenup gently, feeling its weight, its history, my mother's love woven through every line. It makes me protected. He stared, speechless, his mouth opening, closing, searching for words he suddenly couldn't shape. Behind him, the young woman stormed out, heels clicking furiously. She didn't look back. My husband called after her, panicked, but she kept walking. He lost everything in a single moment, not because of me, but because of his own arrogance. I walked past him with quiet dignity, my lawyer beside me, sunlight from the courthouse windows falling across my shoulders like a blessing. Outside, I paused at the top of the steps, the prenup clasped in my hand. I whispered softly, "You shouldn't have forgotten this." When I stepped out of the courthouse, the air tasted different, lighter somehow, as if the sky itself exhaled for me. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath my feet instead of floating through my pain. Sunlight brushed my cheeks, warm and soft, and a breeze lifted the ends of my hair like a quiet blessing. Behind me, I could still hear the faint echoes of my husband calling after the young woman as she stormed across the parking lot, her heels clicking like sparks against concrete. "Wait, baby, don't do this. Listen to me." Her voice was sharp, slicing through the hot air. "No, you lied. You promised me everything, this house, this money, this life." She spun around, pointing at him with fury in her eyes. "Turns out I backed the wrong man." A bitter laugh left her lips, and she shook her head in disbelief. "You really thought you'd win against a woman who raised you? A woman who lived with you longer than I've been alive? You're a fool." He reached for her arm. She yanked it away so violently that even I flinched. "No," she said again, quieter this time, but colder. "This is where you end." She walked away, spine straight, chin lifted. He stood alone now, watching her vanish around the corner, jaw clenched, eyes wide with a grief he had never shown for me. And maybe that should have hurt. Maybe the sight should have cracked open the last soft parts of my heart. But it didn't. Not anymore. I turned away before he could notice me watching, before he could try to call out to me with false remorse or desperate regret. I wanted no part of that moment. His new heartbreak was not mine to carry. My lawyer touched my elbow gently. "Ready to go home?" Home. For the first time, the word didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a promise. That evening, I stood in my doorway, letting the familiar smell of lavender and lemon-scented polish wash over me. It was quiet inside, peaceful, warm, safe. A sanctuary my mother fought to protect long before I understood why. I slipped off my shoes and walked toward the kitchen as golden light spilled across the floor. My wedding ring still lay in my pocket, heavy in a way I hadn't expected. I pulled it out and held it up to the fading sunlight. 32 years. 32 years of cooking, laughing, arguing, surviving, hoping, and slowly disappearing. With steady fingers, I set the ring on the counter. It made a soft metallic tap against the marble. And something in me released, like a knot finally loosening after being twisted too long. My phone buzzed on the table. His name appeared on the screen. I watched it, let it ring, let it fall silent. Seconds later, a message came in. "Please, can we talk?" Then another. "I made a mistake." Then, "I didn't know she'd leave." Then, "You still care about me, don't you?" I turned the phone face down on the table and walked away. Silence is its own kind of closure. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to curse him, didn't need to teach him a lesson. Life had already done that for me. Later, I sat at my dining table, prenup folder resting beside a cooling cup of tea. My hands were steadier than they'd been in months. The sunlight no longer felt harsh. It felt like it belonged here again. As I reached to close the folder, I noticed something. A small, cream-colored envelope tucked inside the back pocket. It was thin, delicate, almost translucent with age. My breath caught. My mother's handwriting. My eyes stung before I even opened it. I slid the letter out carefully. It was folded twice, edges worn soft from time. I pressed it flat on the table, smoothing the creases with trembling hands. Her handwriting danced across the page in familiar curls. My sweet girl, if you are reading this, it means something changed in your life. Something I prayed would never come. You love deeply. You give too fully. And sometimes, that kind of heart needs protection more than anything else. Tears gathered, blurring the ink. I insisted on the prenup not because I doubted your love, but because I trusted life less than I trusted you. People change. Circumstances change. Feelings change. But your worth, that must never be up for debate. My hand flew to my mouth as a sob escaped. I prayed you'd never need it, but I wanted you safe, in every way I knew how. The room felt warmer suddenly, as if she were sitting in the chair across from me, the way she used to. Hands folded, eyes kind, wisdom radiating through her quiet presence. I read the last lines through a blur of tears. If the day ever comes when someone tries to take from you what is yours, remember who you are, remember what I taught you, and remember this: strength can be silent, but it is still strength. My tears fell freely now, soft, steady, cleansing. I pressed the letter to my chest, inhaling as deeply as my shaking lungs allowed. "Thank you, Mama," I whispered. "Thank you for seeing the storm before I did." That night, I sat on my porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the sky fade from gold to lavender to soft blue. The world felt gentle. My heart felt quiet. Not happy, not triumphant, just free. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying him anymore. His bitterness, his entitlement, his cruelty, his disappointment, his lies. I felt lighter than I remembered feeling in my 30s, in my 40s, lighter even than when we first married. And that was when I understood. I hadn't lost anything today. I had gained myself back. I closed my eyes, letting the cool evening air kiss my face. He left, thinking he'd taken everything. I whispered softly into the fading light. A small smile curved my lips. But all he took was the weight I'd carried for 32 years. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.